Always follow it. It's like following the money if you're like an accountant, but don't follow the money. Follow the information.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome, awesome. Thank you so much for that already. I think that has already set the tempo for our chat this evening. Uh, Welcome everyone to the product chat with Fumnanya, and today I have a very special guest with me, Jason Knight. If you're on Twitter or LinkedIn, you probably have seen one of his memes or videos. Those are my favorite parts. I especially the B2B videos on B2B product management. Those are very interesting because I face them regularly in my workplace. So that's really awesome. Yeah. So before we get into it, I'll just read like a really short bio so you guys know Jason. Um, Jason is a B2B product leader, consultant, and coach. He's a founder and a podcaster. By day, he works with B2B startups and scale ups to help them build great products and build the team that build great products. And by night, he speaks to inspiring thought leaders, practitioners, and founders on his podcast, One Night in Products, which is a really great podcast, by the way. He's also a passionate advocate for mentorship, and he's the co founder of My Mentor Part, which is a platform that aims to make mentorship accessible to all. So yeah, let's give Jason a really warm welcome. Just some thumbs up, some nice, yeah, awesome, awesome, great, great. This is
Thank
awesome.
you for having me, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Where
Great.
where is it? Where is everyone based here? Are you all in the same?
Uh, yeah, where's everyone coming in from? I think most of us are in Nigeria, but I don't want to speculate. Uh, I'm in Lagos, Nigeria. Anyone else in Lagos? Anyone in Abuja? Anyone outside of Nigeria?
Mhm.
Anyone from yeah, a lot most of us here are in Lagos,
There you go.
which is
Well,
great.
you'll be delighted to know I've got 2 or 3 episodes on the podcast with Nigerian product people as well. So if you want to go and listen
Oh,
to those,
great,
um,
great, great. That's awesome. So you guys can check the one night in product podcast. I think it's on all podcast aggregations. Yes,
that is
including.
correct. I'll put the link in the chat as well. But yeah, so it's available on all the places.
Awesome, awesome. So you guys can also check out the link. Great, great. So I guess the first place that we'll really be starting from is just your journey so far. I mean, you're a veteran.
So
Not
you're calling me old? What? This is the second time today I've been called old. It's unbelievable. I shouldn't have to put up with this.
yeah, I mean, you've been doing this for 22 years, and it's really a testament to see people like you who have been doing this for a really long time. And I just wanted you to share your journey.
Yeah.
Yeah, just really short, like how your product journey has progressed so far.
Yeah, I mean, I think like a lot of people, and I'm sure again, like many people on this call, kind of product management happened to me more than anything else. It wasn't something that I didn't grow up as a kid thinking that I was going to be a product manager. In fact, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a doctor. But then I did
Oh,
work.
same.
Yeah, well, but then I did work experience at a hospital, and I was like, I don't know, I don't want to be a doctor anymore. It was too much, too many juices and fluids for my liking. So I started, uh, thinking about maybe going to some kind of computing thing. And actually, my first job was working in a call center, like so on the phones, like you wearing a headset like this,
Yeah.
which I took. It was a 2 week job, and it lasted for 2.5 years. So I obviously did really well there, but eventually moved into effectively their IT department. So I really started from the ground. Um,
Mhm.
Basically programming little because I'm so old, like little green screen monitors, the little green screen terminals that were used for telephone interviews.
Yeah.
And basically spent a very long time, sort of 20 years or so, or just under, in market research technology. So working yes, originally on these kind of green screens, and then moving into, I'm sure you're aware that sort of in the early 2000s, online surveys and online
Yeah.
questionnaires became more popular.
Mhm.
So starting to work building those and becoming more of a developer. So I basically had spent a large part of my career as a developer, sort of bit of front end, bit of back end, eventually kind of migrating or becoming full stack, but then moving into development leadership. And by the way, there was no words product in any of this at any point. I was working for an agency, effectively working with big blue chip clients. But
Yeah.
as time progressed, that agency really started wanting to, as many do, really started wanting to digitally transform. All big companies end up wanting to digitally transform, and in some cases they try to digitally transform 6 or 7 times, and they're still waiting for the eighth one. But in this case, you start to really gravitate much more towards product because they were starting to try to build products. And as I was in a leadership position and a tech leadership position, it started to become much more natural for me to stop worrying about how we were building stuff and worry about what we were building. And that was really my introduction to product. We never called it product still. It was
Yeah.
still, as again with many, kind of product happened to me. So it was really over a course of a few years that you start to realize that actually, yeah, I'm kind of doing product now, and realized that maybe doing product in a 100-year-old German multinational was maybe not the best tech place to go and do it. So decided that it was a time, after many years of working for big companies, to maybe go and try and work for some startups and some scale-ups. So the last few years has been a selection of startups and scale-ups moving into pure product management, product leadership. And I think it really suits my general attitude, which is, I like to get stuck in. I like to get involved in everything. I don't like to just get stuck into the code anymore. I like to understand what we're doing and why, and I like to talk about the strategy, and I like to talk to users and understand what we're building and why we're building it and who we're building it for. So, and I'm just kind of, I like being involved in all those areas. But one thing I will say, and again, I don't know how many people here were developers, maybe they can put their thumbs up if they started as a developer, but I found it really important to move away from being just a developer. Like, it's really easy for people to come from developer to product, but
Yeah.
really half of their mind is still in a development world, and they spend all their time talking to developers. They spend all their time thinking about technical solutions and architecture. But I think it's really important for those people to build up their skills in the other areas of product management, around the sort of the market-facing stuff and the user-facing stuff, and not,
Yeah.
as often happens and has happened to me in the past, kind of being dragged back into technical issues because maybe things are going difficult. Things are difficult. Things are going hard. You're having some difficult discussions, and it's really easy to go back into technical land because that's where you started. But I would always encourage people, when times are tough, lean into the tough and try and stay as close as possible to the bits of the job that maybe you're not so naturally good at.
Mm-hmm. Wow, amazing. Uh that's incredible.
Hopefully, it was useful.
That's incredible. So surprisingly, we did have a product manager who was formerly a developer come talk to us last month. He currently works in Microsoft, and he also faced a similar challenge where he was so tempted to go back into development or
Hmm.
engineering, so to say, but he stuck it out and was able to get some see some land at the end of the day, and so he's doing really really well now in Microsoft. Thank you so much for sharing your journey with us, Jason.
Yeah, no problem. No problem.
Today's topic is really centered around product centricity. I remember when we had the short 30 minutes chat about how products work here in Nigeria, how product management works here, and you asked me a couple of questions. And I read your article around shaping a product centric organization, which I think was a really fantastic article. It was really brilliant. I got a lot of insights from there that I know I'll be using in the near term and long term. But I just want to start with product centricity as a whole.
Hmm.
Um, what would you say are the key benefits of going the product centric approach compared to other traditional methods that we currently have in today's business landscape?
So by traditional methods, do you mean kind of sales focused, deal focused, that sort of
Yes.
thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and again, you talked earlier about B2B, and I guess that's a big part of this as well. Like, obviously it's much less common to have any kind of particular big sales motion in B2C. I'm sure that there are some examples, but like B2B is really what you're talking about. And I think that it's something that you see a lot. And what you see is you have a founder that has an idea, and I'm never going to sit there and kind of complain about that, because some people, for example, like to dig into founders a little bit. They're like, oh, these stupid founders, they're not being product people, they're not product managers, they're not doing quote unquote product thinking. But we have to call out that these people, for better or worse, they had the idea, they raised the money, this is their company, or at least the majority of their company, almost by definition. And unless they've diluted over so many different rounds of funding, but like this is their baby, right? And very often the product managers are brought in maybe a little bit too late. So the product thinking or lack of is kind of done by the team, that founding team. Originally, the CEO is generally the de facto product leader, but also in many cases the CEO maybe doesn't come from a product background. Maybe they come from more of a commercial background, or maybe more of a strategic background, and they make what to them are the really good calls at the time to help grow the business, and probably the same sorts of calls that anyone else that has a new company and maybe not so much money or runway, maybe they have to make those calls too. And especially if they're not particularly technical, it's very tempting to sit there and say, okay, well, fine. The next deal that comes up, the next person we speak to, okay, well, they want some stuff, so let's do that. And that sounds like the sort of thing that we think other people want. And they keep doing that again and again and again. And you can actually get a reasonable amount of growth through that. And in fact, if you're really, really lucky, I'm sure that you could continue to grow for a long time like that if you just lucky speak to people in the order that's actually important and you maintain some kind of sales discipline. I think the problem is that it's like almost, I don't know if anyone plays poker, but it's like it's like you're always trying to get another ace every
Yeah.
time. And like the way I put it to someone once was like, the chances, is it only me that can hear the speaker? I don't know what that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you clearly. Thumbs up if you can hear Jason. Just a quick thumbs up. Great, 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 great.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Jason, you're good. I think something is wrong with Yusuf's speaker. Yusuf, tried to get out of the call and join in again. I think that should work.
Yeah,
Right.
but I think, again, it goes down to that point, like, well, what are the chances of you continually drawing an ace from the pack? What are the chances of you happening to speak to someone who has exactly the same needs as everyone else and the most important thing for them being the most important thing for your market? The chances are probably pretty small. Not impossible, but small. It's like winning the lottery after a while. So then you sit there and think, well, what is the best way that we can build a scalable business? The best way we can build a scalable business with good unit economics, where we're not having to throw people at every problem and we're not having to build something different for every deal, is to start to understand the market, understand your users, start to understand the customers and what it is that the market wants, not what the individuals want, and start to put some of that rigor in. Now, what I mean by product managers coming in too late is that sometimes by the time you get good product people within an organization, the companies develop what I call revenue debt, which is like they've got so much different or so many different sources of revenue from so many different unconnected or disconnected parts of the market that it's almost impossible for them to start turning down deals from any part of that market, because they've got so much revenue tied up. It's almost like tech debt, but for revenue. They can't fix it, because to fix it would mean saying no, and to say no would jeopardize like 20% of their revenue or something like that. So you get caught in this cycle where if you keep building for too long, just based on deals and just based on whatever comes up next and being very deal led, then you end up with a product that probably doesn't really satisfy anyone perfectly. So then there's an interesting question. Well, does it have to satisfy everyone perfectly? And that's a very good question. Like, maybe sometimes it's going to be good enough. Are you going to be the biggest company in the world like that? Maybe not. Are you going to be big enough to maybe get acquired? Maybe. Who knows? But if you want to make a really good product that suits the needs of the many and really solves a problem well, the only way to do that is to get ahead of the deals And I would propose that the best way to do that is to apply some of this product thinking that we all talk about, the product principles, speaking to the customers, understanding the needs of the market, making sure that you're prioritizing for impact, making sure that you're not getting distracted with things that aren't going to add value to the solution. If you can get into that situation and try and get to, as I kind of try and put it, ahead of the curve. So like if you imagine there's like a sales curve, and often product teams in B2B organizations are behind it. They're always trying to play catch up because they never did the work before. And it's hard to get ahead of that curve. But if you can get ahead of that curve, then what you're building is a more, in theory at least, a more repeatable, scalable business, which is going to be able to support more customers and ultimately be worth more money. So that's the benefit of product centricity for me. But I do understand why people get into a situation where maybe they're not like that, simply because they just did what they had to do.
Yeah, yeah. Wow, that's awesome. Really, really, really insightful, especially with the idea of being deal led. I personally think that it gets to a point where you can't be deal led anymore, and you have to be product centric at the end of the day, which is really, really vital for the growth of.
I think you'd
Uh,
be surprised. I think that there are many companies out there,
mhm.
like many companies out there will sit there and they'll say, we want to be product led because they've either seen something in an article about it, or they've been had some pressure from the investors, or they've been speaking to other founders, and they probably believe that they want to be product led, but at the same time, they don't always understand what types of trade-offs that actually means that they're going to have to make. So, for example, maybe it does mean turning down that deal that looks like easy money, but actually would impact the roadmap for everyone else for 3 months. Right?
Mm.
Maybe it does do that. Are they prepared to do that, or is it simply the fact that any amount of money on the table is going to automatically be a win? If that's the case, then again, you can still grow a business like that. I would argue that you're unlikely to be able to grow the business super big, super large, because there's going to be a limiting factor. But at the same time, I'm sure that there are many examples out there of companies that are doing okay by just chasing whatever money comes. You start to get into this almost similar to being an agency or a sort of custom development house to some extent.
Yeah, exactly.
If, as long as you charge enough money for that, that's cool. If you're trying to do that on product money, like relatively cheap, because you're charging money that should be being charged for a standardized solution, but you're offering them a customized solution every time, then
Yeah,
sure, that's going to start to be a problem. But if you charge enough money, maybe people have professional services fees on top of their platform fees and stuff like that, you can probably do okay. But I would
hmm,
always say that you would almost certainly do better if you did really, again, try and get ahead of that curve and try and build the scale and from repeatability rather than just whatever comes up.
yeah. That's awesome. Thank you so much for that answer, Jason. And I want to say to all our guests here, if you have questions, please leave them in the chat. Jason will be more than happy to answer those questions. So let's go to. I mean, you have been consulting for a lot of companies for a lot of years now. I mean, you're in a company right now consulting for them. And what are some of those obstacles that you basically have faced with companies who say they want to adopt a product-centric mindset, but it's just really difficult for them? Those obstacles keep coming up. And what are some of the solutions that you were able to prefer to those obstacles when they came up?
I think status quo bias is very strong. It's strong in good companies and it's strong in bad companies and it's strong in all different types of companies. Like it's really hard to get people to change what they're already doing if they've been doing it for a while. I think this is just a natural, this is a human thing. It's probably the same for people outside of product, inside of product, all around the world, in any country. Like people kind of fall back on, talking about earlier about the technical skills and like how you almost default back to your mindset because that's
Yeah,
what you know. And I think, again, it's the thing. So, like, if you're going into a company with a strong service mindset, a strong build whatever comes up mindset,
yeah,
and you're expecting them to all of a sudden be like, the lean startup or the most product centric company in the world, it's almost certainly not going to happen. Like not
Mhm.
not like that anyway. Like it's gonna, if it does happen, it's gonna take a long time, and there's almost certainly going to be some resistance within the organization simply because they never did this before, and that could be because they don't believe it could work, or it could be that they're just scared, or they don't
Yeah.
understand the new way. And that's not to call them, dumb. It's not that they're dumb. It's just that they don't understand it because they never saw it before. So they
Mhm.
naturally distrust it, and they distrust it because it's new. And again,
Mhm.
this is a very natural human emotion. There's a natural human response.
Yeah.
Now, the you might sit there and say, well, the consultant's job is to just go in with a big, like a baseball bat, knock a few things over, push some guy out the window and make big change straight away. I don't think that works. I mean, it it does work in one sense. For example, if your goal is to go in and cost cut, then you could go in and fire a bunch of people, and that will cut costs. It probably have a bunch of other effects too, but
Yeah.
you can impact things like that. I don't necessarily think that's the right way. I think that the way to do it is to go in and really concentrate on, and I use this phrase too much at the moment, which is just the concept of marginal gains. Like
Yeah.
you're going to be making lots and lots of small steps. It's a marathon, not a sprint. You are not going to be able to change an entire organization overnight just by saying, "Hey, everyone, I've read Inspired by a guy you've never heard of, and now you should do all that stuff." Like they're not going to get it. So you need to work on them. Now, one of the things that you can sit there and try and do, and one thing I like to try to get to at least is, well, whenever you're trying to, for want of a better phrase, win an argument with someone about what the best thing is even if they don't understand or get the solution yet, at least get them to understand the problem or agree that there is a problem. So you can sit there and say, okay, fine. Well, actually, we're really struggling to deliver software in a timely fashion, and our customers are always complaining, or something along those lines. And you can sit there and say, okay, fine. Do we think that's a problem? Like, no one's going to sit there and say that's not a problem, right? And then you can start asking them, yes, the five whys. Do some discovery on your colleagues. Product people talk about discovery all the time. We always want to do discovery with our users, but often we don't do discovery on our stakeholders, on our partners within the business. So do some discovery. Try and find why why that is a problem, and get them to acknowledge some of the root causes of that problem. And again, they might not understand the solution instantly, or they may have a different idea about what the best solution is. But at least if you can get them to admit the problem and that it's a problem that needs to be solved, you're making them a partner in solving it. Whereas if you just immediately just jump to solutions and try and railroad them, then you're going to get a lot more resistance. So I do think it's important to try and win that battle. I talked earlier about sort of people, politics, and process. Like you've got to win that battle for hearts and minds if you want to make any change, because the only way to do it without winning it is to force it. And if you force it, again, you could sack some people or change a process that everyone hates or something like that to a different one that everyone else hates. But it's not going to, people are going to be doing it because they're scared. They're not going to be doing it because they want to. And you want people to want to do it.
Well, that's a really amazing insight. One thing I really got from that is the product discovery for stakeholders.
Yeah.
A lot of people, as you make the assumptions that all people are the same, everyone wants the same thing, and that's really, really, really terrible. A terrible place to be in, especially when you're a product manager. But speaking about product managers, now, I mean, product managers are the center of organizations. Every product manager on this call wants to adopt a product-centric mindset. What strategies would you suggest to these product managers all on this call, to help them to be able to adopt a product-centric mindset within their organization?
I think the most important thing when trying to adopt anything in any organization is to, for example, we go back to the Inspired and Marty Kagan. Like, love the book. I've read it twice. I've interviewed Marty on the podcast. He's a very smart guy. Got an enormous amount of respect for him. But if people don't know what he's talking about, you're very unlikely to win that ideological battle just by saying, "Hey, clever product stuff." Like, that's not the way to get it. What you need to do as a product person trying to maybe improve the product centricity or the product processes or whatever you want to call it, the product mindset within your organization. It's important to try and sell that in terms that resonate with the people that you're talking to. So you're not going to go to a salesperson and start going outcomes over outputs and all of a sudden they just get it. I mean, which is interesting actually, because sales teams are one of the most sort of outcomes over outputs teams that there are, because actually sales teams don't care about the particular deals as such that they're winning. They care about the number that is attached to those deals. That, you know, if there's account A, account B, and account C, as long as they make the money from any of those accounts, they don't care which one. So that's like almost, if we consider accounts to be like features, then the sales team are very outcomes over outputs, but they don't think about it in those ways. I also remember having a chat with someone once around this idea of OKRs and how, you know, the objectives that you're trying to go for through OKRs should be an outcome, not an output. And I had this kind of back and forth around, well, obviously to us, an outcome is some change in behavior, something that happens because we've made a change. Whereas to many people, an outcome is you've shipped some code. That's something we can sell now. So trying to get into ideological battles and using phraseology that people don't understand isn't necessarily that helpful, because they're just going to sit there and say, well, what did that mean? So I think trying to translate the benefits and explain the benefits of what you're trying to do without resorting to product management cliches, without resorting to product management phrasing and trying to sound all clever and that you've read a few books more than they have. Try to boil it down to something. Again, going back to that discovery, that empathy with your stakeholders. What do they want out of, you know, life at work? You know, what's going to be important for them, and how can you translate the things that we want to do? You know, we want to have evidence-based decision making. We want to do customer discovery. We want to measure the results of what we're building so that we know that we did a good job. You know, we want to get stuff out quickly and iteratively. Like, explaining why those enable business success in ways that resonate with business people is more important than sitting there saying, well, read this book and then come back to me.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you so much. And I think when I read your article, there's something that you said. So I'm going to quote you here. One thing I constantly recommend PMs to do is to translate all the things they care about, which is discovery, data, user outcomes, users and outcomes, into things that non-product people care about, which is money, risk, and excitement. It doesn't mean that we need to abandon our principles, just need to find better ways to describe them. And that was something that really stuck out for me, because I mean, we are all stakeholders, working with other stakeholders to see how we can get things moving, how we can push the needle. And it was really, really important to see that that there is no way that you can win by using product jargons. There's no way, because you're going to get sidetracked when the money comes in, when the money conversation comes in. No one is essentially going to listen to you with product jargons. So it's really important that you translate all of that discovery and data into what non-product people would actually see and resonate with.
But it's the
Yeah.
same with salespeople and or other people. Like, you know, how we're sitting there expecting salespeople to care about the, you know, continuous discovery or, you know,
The
rice
outcomes of the
frameworks
output.
or ice, but yeah, all these different things that we kind of complain at. So, but how much do we know about what they do? Now, I'm not saying who's right. I'm just saying that everyone does things differently, and the CS team is going to have different frameworks. You know, the CS people have their own Marty Kagans. Sales teams have their own Marty Kagans. Everyone's got their own Marty Kagan, like their own thought leader in an industry that's explaining to them how they should work. And maybe that person is telling them to do something different. But also then layer on top of that, the simple fact is that in many organizations, or probably most organizations, the incentives or the goals of these different teams are not aligned, which means that if you don't know what their goals are, you can't kind of link in with them, which means that you're always going to be butting heads. And I've worked in so many organizations where you have like a sales team and a product team that just don't talk, or a sales
Yeah.
team and a product team and a marketing team that don't talk, or they barely talk, or they only talk when there's a complaint. How on earth do we expect to work with people and be successful with people we've got to accept that these people they want the company to be successful. They obviously want
Yeah.
themselves to be successful, but they want to be successful because it helps it helps them hit the goals that make the company successful, and obviously then that keeps them in a job and builds their reputation and hopefully gets them some extra money or whatever,
Yeah.
especially in the sales world. So like these people want to be for the most part successful. They just have different ideas about what being successful means. So unless you know what those ideas are, you're not going to match up with it. But again, all I can say is that it's very difficult for us to justify complaining about, for example, the sales team. They're always the easy target. If we don't even, I mean, I've read a bunch of sales books, right? Because I think it's interesting to know what these people are being told to do and the different types of approaches that they use. And if I don't know what they are, I have no business complaining that they don't know what mine are.
Yeah, I totally agree. In terms of breaking silos here, a lot of organizations go through um, siloed communication. Like you said, sales in most companies, marketing and product don't even talk to each other. They probably talk to each other when it's time to release a feature or when it's time to release a product that marketing has no idea about, and that doesn't essentially work. So I mean, what strategies would you suggest for product managers that they can use to successfully break down silos and foster collaboration across the different departments to also support a product-centric culture?
I mean, when it comes to breaking down silos, I think it's just communication is everything.
Yeah,
So, like we talked earlier about how teams aren't talking to each other, like that has to stop. Like, and one of the most important things, actually, for me, if it's a sales-led organization, is to get into a situation like, for example, the common complaint around with sales-led organizations is like, well, uh, here we go again, like another sales request that's come through that we have to do now is going to blow up the roadmap. And you sit there and say, but hang on, this was a 6 months sales cycle. How did we only find out about this now?
yeah,
So one of the things that I like to implement in organizations that do have long sales cycles is like a very regular deal review process where you get the product team and the sales team to talk about what's in the pipeline, what's moving forward, state of the account, any asks, that sort of thing. So you can intercept these things more quickly. Like, so that's a fairly structured thing. You have a group of people meet every month. You can also have regular catch-ups with the CS team, the account management team, with the support teams, because it's very easy for developers just to get into like regular retros, for example, with the development team, but not so much with the rest of the organization. So actually, put some time in, speak to these people. They are people, and they have motivations, and ultimately, I'm sure that they would prefer that everything kind of went their way, but at the same time, it's much easier to kind of bond with these people and empathize with these people and get them to empathize with you if you talk to them.
yeah,
So yeah, I do. I'm a big fan of getting people talking in regular sessions. If you're the product leader, for example, speaking to the heads of other departments on certain, on a certain cadence, go for coffee, buy them lunch, that sort of thing. I'm a big believer in the kind of the human touch. Now, obviously, if you're working remote, that becomes a little bit more difficult, but at the same time, you can still have a video call from time to time and just try and drive this general communication. Like, it's not acceptable for people in organizations that work together or work in the same direction to not talk to each other. It doesn't make any sense.
mm-hmm.
I'm also a big fan of, from a product perspective, like I'm a big fan of transparency. I want the entire organization knowing a couple of things. I want them to know what we're working on, why we're working on it, and what we're working on next. Like, so
Yeah,
something I like to do there is bring in some kind of almost like a show and tell type meeting, which I'm sure some of you do, like every couple of weeks, every 4 weeks. Let's just demonstrate to the company what we've been building and how it's going and what's coming up and so forth. I think another important thing is when it comes to, for example, building or starting new initiatives that you're maybe going to build.
mm-hmm.
You obviously you'll be aware of the concept of PRDs or one pages or 6 pages or however many pages, but just this idea that it's much better to get that up early and share it and actively request comments you as a PM still get to make the call, and it's your job to work out what to do with those comments. But rather than sitting there and like to your point earlier, the marketing team don't know something's coming. The marketing team should always know something's coming. It's not acceptable that the marketing team doesn't know that there's a feature coming out in a couple of months or weeks or whatever. Like, do they get to define the feature in all of its glory? Probably not. Should they
Hmm.
know about it and at least have a chance to kind of comment or feedback on it? Absolutely. Because otherwise, guess what? They're just going to comment and feedback on it just before you release it. And then guess what? You're going to delay releasing it because all of a sudden there's some critical thing that no one thought about that, for 5 minutes of talking or showing on a document or something, they could have said, oh, hang on a minute, what about this thing? We're doing a rebrand the week after that or something. And they probably never told you about that either. So, like, how can we get teams talking to each other so that we know what we're doing without making it so much that like you're always talking to each other? That's the flip side. Like, if you're always talking to each other, then who's getting any work done? So like
Hmm.
you need to strike a balance. But for me, so much of it is as simple as just getting people talking to each other and sharing their plans. One of the
Yeah.
things I liked about Google's OKR approach, which you see in things like Measure What Matters, which is like the second best OKR book, I think. You should read
What's
Radical Focus. You should read by Christina Woodkey.
Yeah,
It's
fantastic.
a better book. But um, the one of the good things about the Google approach, which was like the first OKR book I read, was this idea that they stick up everyone's like everyone. I think they have individual OKRs in Google as well,
Yeah.
but everyone has their own OKRs like sort of visible to everyone, so everyone knows what everyone's being measured against and what their plans are and what they're working on and why. And you're sort of sitting there saying, oh well, you know. Why is Dave not working on this thing? And you can look up and say, well, Dave's been tasked with this other stuff, or whatever. So like, that level of transparency could be uncomfortable for some companies, but I'm always going to be in favor of more transparency, not less.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Thank you so much for those insights, Jason. And I think we do have a question in the chat. What would you describe as the North Star metric? This is Muiwa asking. What would you describe as the North Star metric of a product-centric approach?
So this is an interesting question because obviously, traditionally speaking, you look at a North Star metric and you say, well, it's something that's specific to the product. Uh, you know, Whatever it is, time to first call for an API product, or number of transactions within 7 days for whatever. Like, those would be kind of very typical North Star metrics. But what we're talking about here is almost the North Star metric of product management itself. And this is an interesting question because I've asked a few people about this in my time. It's something that I think that occupies the minds of many product leaders. Like, how do you prove that product management is working? And obviously, the way that you prove product management is working is by building a product that, in B2B terms anyway, that the team can sell. But unfortunately, that's not good enough because the sad truth is that a great sales team can sell a crappy product, and a crappy sales team might not sell a great product. Like, there's as extreme examples. So it's not just as simple as revenue, although obviously revenue is a part of it. Like, you have to we have to kind of look at it and say, well, if a company has a product that people want, then it's going to have more users, it's going to have more revenue coming in, it's going to have better retention, it's going to have better like number of minutes and stuff like that. But these are again not necessarily proving that product management works. So then you start thinking, well, you know, what is it? Is it like something like time taken on initiatives, like time to deliver features from start to finish? So that's more of an engineering metric in many ways, right? So, like, is that the thing? Probably not. Is it number of bets made and versus or number of bets won versus number of bets made? It's like, well, yeah, but anyone can make that metric. I guess the long story short is I don't have a perfect North Star metric for like, is product management working? But I do think that it is important for people within organizations, product people within organizations, to have almost like a business case mentality towards the product. So like, I don't necessarily want it to be as simple as, oh, how much revenue we're making, but you know ultimately that's what the company cares about, right? Like, they care that they're bringing in money or they're reducing costs. So how can we draw a line from the initiatives that we're sponsoring and the amount of time that we spent on those initiatives, the amount of money we spent building those things, to the impact they had. So they're not really North Stars. There's not like one metric. It's going to be very much almost like per product team. I'd struggle to find like just one metric for product organization, but just trying to work out like how did this product squad, pod, team, whatever contribute? Like how many initiatives did it sponsor? How many of those worked, and what impact did those initiatives have on the top and bottom line? I guess the problem is that in many cases you might subdivide the product teams too much, and maybe there's not like a direct attribution. Because, for example, if people are buying a product like an all or nothing product which has 4 product teams under it, then maybe it's not as easy to attribute to each of those different product squads because they're buying everything. But trying to find some way to apportion and attribute uh, business outcomes to the to the product and to product teams
Yeah.
alongside some kind of metric around retention, growth, and number of users. I think again, there's no perfect metric, and you could argue, as we said earlier, that some companies could accidentally make these numbers go up for a bit just by doing anything. But I think over time, those numbers are going to go up more if you're in a product organization.
Yeah. Right. Thank you so much for that answer. Bookie's asking, as a new product manager recently got hired to
Mm.
his or her first company, what first steps does the product manager do in terms of aligning the product team and also the first steps in setting out the product strategy?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting in a way because you'd almost argue that the strategy and the alignment are the wrong way around. Like you need to get a strategy to align them around. I think it's also fair to say that a lot of companies don't have any strategy. Like you can't have a product strategy if you don't have a company strategy. Like the company needs to know where it's going. And I think if you're in a very deal-led environment, then the company's really only chasing revenue. It's not really chasing any kind of vision or goal as such. So try to pin the leadership down and say, well, look, where do you actually want this company to go? And what's our overall vision? And maybe they don't know. In which case, you're probably in trouble, and you're probably in much more of a feature factory mentality. But if you can have at least a basic idea of where what the company's vision is, what the strategy is for the company, the business strategy, you can then start to map a product strategy off of that. Like, what does our product need to do to support that strategy? You've probably seen the pyramid, product vision, product strategy, product initiatives, product tickets, whatever. Like, I'm a big fan of saying that like any single thing that you do as a team, you should be able to draw a line from wherever that is all the way up to the top, all the way down to the bottom. So you should always know, like, whatever it is that you're working on, which segment of the strategy, which part of the strategy, which goal that's actually contributing to. And I think that the best teams that I've worked with, they always have that kind of idea of like, well, yeah, this thing is for like this OKR or this goal or this vision piece or this strategic pillar, and you always know what you're working on and why you're working on it, and how that contributes to business strategy. With regards to aligning the product team, I mean, a lot of that again is around that hearts and minds thing. Like you're going into a team, especially if it's a low performing team, maybe not been in a particularly strategic mindset, maybe it's just been in delivery mode. Just trying to get them excited about that vision in the first place, and giving them almost the permission to either challenge it or talk about it and comment and feedback on it, so that you can take those back into your thinking and your planning as well. So you want everyone to feel like they're contributing to something. If they don't feel like they're contributing to something, then they're just people typing.
Yeah.
They're typing code out that you tell them to type out. If they believe that the thing that you're solving, the problem you're solving is important, then they're going to be more likely to want to solve it. I think another powerful method to do, especially if you have a very internally focused development team, is to either get them in front of customers that have this problem, or at least show them quotes or videos of people that have this problem, so that they can start to, on a more human level, empathize with the problems that they're trying to solve,
Mhm.
understand why the thing that you're asking them to do is important, rather than it being this kind of abstract piece of work that they maybe get some recognition for, or maybe don't.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for that answer, Jason. Lydia is asking, hi, Jason, can you differentiate between product centric versus customer centric? And do you have any examples of companies taking either approach? And at what stage would you say a company should adopt being product centric or customer centric?
Well, I think it's interesting actually because a lot of product people will talk about, or a lot of product books even will talk about customer centricity.
Yeah,
And for me, the problem with customer centricity is that it's a singular, and it's very easy for a sales team to sit there and say, "Well, we're customer centric
yeah,
because we just spoke to that customer and we tried to do whatever they said." And it's like customers centric, which is where the product thinking comes in. So it's almost like, and it's not just me that says this, but like the sales team are looking after customers, but what we're looking at as product teams are markets. We're looking at collections of, we're looking at customers with a capital S. We don't not care about individual customers. Of course, we care about individual customers, but we care more about all of our customers. I think that the flip side of that is, of course, that in some cases, if you're in a relatively small B2B organization with not many customers, then actually the individual punching power of any one of those customers is a lot higher than it would be, for example, if you're running a social media app for the mass market. But because if you're running a social media app for the mass market, you probably don't really care overall if one person leaves. You care if a lot of people leave, but you don't care if one person leaves. Whereas if you're in a B2B organization, it's not one person that's leaving, it's one organization. And
mm,
that could be worth $150,000 or something like that. So it's trickier in that sort of situation. But I think when it comes to examples of companies taking either approach, I mean, unless there's a different definition of customer centric, I think customer centric to me, as opposed to, so product centric is customer centric. However, the way that a lot of people read customer centric is individual customer centric, which is sales led. And that's really what we've been talking about, this idea that there's probably a tipping point. You start your early growth by maybe having a couple of reference customers or a design partner customer or something like that can kind of help you get started. And I've definitely been in situations like that where almost the entire solution was built around the needs of one customer.
mm-hmm.
However, that started to really creak because lots of other customers wanted different stuff, but also we couldn't change it because the original customers didn't want the different stuff. So then you start getting into tricky situations. So I think as you start to scale out, you really need to think about how do we make the things that we're building generic or configurable enough so that if we do have to change it, we're not re-architecting the whole system. We're just changing the configuration or some stuff around the sides or around the edge. And this is another big thing for kind of sales-led, deal-led planning is like always trying to look at it through the lens of how can we make this a generic request rather than just a special thing that we're doing for one customer that's hard coded for them. Like one of the things I think is important when you're talking about sales led or customer singular led stuff is making sure that you still do as much product management around that as possible. Like, is it as good as going out to the market and doing loads of discovery and getting loads of data and finding out and having opportunity solution trees? And no, of course not. It's not as good as doing any of that for a product person. But there is still product management that you can do around these things, around validating the size of the opportunity, how much of a general solution this could be, and what you could do to make this, for example, as small as possible, but while still satisfying the need. So I think even when you are customer centric, it is really important to try to apply as much product thinking lens around it and try and almost work backwards to an actual product solution, even if it didn't start there.
Yeah, right. So we'll just take two final questions before calling the day. Um, Oluwafelami asks, hi Jason, considering the future of product management, what skill will you say is most crucial to learn as a product manager?
I would say a big thing that I'm talking about at the moment, or trying to talk about, is just maybe it's not a perfectly precise to call it an individual skill, but just the general concept of business sense, or you could maybe even call it entrepreneurialism. What I don't want to see is product managers getting caught in infinite analytical loops, using all of their product management thinking, but never actually delivering anything at all. I
Yeah.
want them to be business partners. I want them not to just be glorified developers. I put an article out the other day about how I don't really see product managers as being part of a delivery team as such. Like they obviously inform the delivery team, they're interested in the delivery, they should absolutely be involved in kind of being there for questions and clarifications and all that stuff, but they shouldn't be sitting there effectively just riding the developers, trying to get them to do some stuff. It's like, no, the developers should be able to look after themselves once the product managers kind of told them what to do and is there for questions. And I'm a strong believer that all of the time, because you see it a lot, right? All of the time that product managers are spending time just wrangling developers and being like emergency delivery managers, they're not doing most of the job, which is going out and talking to people, going out and sensing the market, talking to stakeholders, aligning the organization, making sure that we're building the most impactful things, not sitting there saying that, again, Dave, this imaginary guy that I made up, that Dave isn't working on this ticket. Like, who cares? Like, someone else can work that out. It needs to be done, but it doesn't have to be the product manager that does it. So I think business sense and just generally being a business partner to the organization is where I want product managers to be. I am sure that in many organizations, there's an intense pressure for it to not be like that, because many organizations, and I know I've spoken to some Nigerian PMs in the past who have complained about this in their organizations. I don't know if it's general to Nigeria or just in their organizations, but many people do still see product management as a delivery function. And I'm a big advocate of getting away from that kind of thinking.
Yeah, I would say it's more of not just Nigerian,
Hmm.
and this is me just trying to save face, by the way. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's more of
Hmm. Hmm.
an African thing, and I think that we will gradually get there, where we are more business minded than just delivery minded on the long run. But thank you for that answer,
Yeah.
Jason.
And by the way, I don't even think it's just an Africa thing. I don't want to pick on Africa. I think this is a very common thing around most of the world. And in fact,
Yeah,
one of my videos that I put up very early, my comedy videos, was the Pulp Fiction one, which actually it was very well received, got low like 15,000 likes or something stupid like that. But it was kind of playing with the idea that there's a big difference between Silicon Valley and the rest of the world, but that's not
yeah,
true. I've never worked in Silicon Valley, but I've spoken to a bunch of people who do work in Silicon Valley, and they're like, well, there are just as many feature factories there as there are anywhere else. It's just that obviously you also have some other people there that aren't, but also the same. I'm sure there are some companies in Africa, in Nigeria, and across Europe and all over the world that have feature factories, and some companies that are more kind of, I'm sure there's a thriving up and coming ecosystem in many countries that are trying to be better, more like some of the classic thinking or being more tech led. I just think that it's just really, really important not to beat ourselves up. And one thing that I really, really want people not to walk away from things thinking is that either their country or that their company or that themselves are doing something wrong as such. Like, there's
yeah,
always chances to improve, right? But no country, no people, no company is doing anything wrong. It's just about whether they need to optimize what they're doing versus staying the same.
yeah. Uh, Thank you so much for that. So, what would you say has been your biggest challenge? This is fella asking again.
Hmm. Hmm.
Your biggest challenge as a product manager, and what product principle has been most relevant to you?
I think the biggest challenge for me as a product manager has been doing most of the stuff that I've been talking about tonight, like I'm some kind of expert, when of course it remains a challenge for every PM, is just this
Yeah,
idea about driving alignment, especially with teams that have very different mindsets, sales teams and such. It's not easy, and it requires constant work. But I think driving that alignment and making sure that you're working together is probably the biggest challenge. Even more of a challenge than getting stuff built, or even to some extent coming up with a strategy, is aligning people around it and keeping people focused. I think the product management principle that has been most relevant to me, I mean, thinking about it, kind of, there's lots of music downstairs. I don't know if you can hear it, hopefully not. But
yeah,
the
we can
product,
hear you.
yeah, no, there's some music going on downstairs. I think someone just started a party. This is what happens when you work for a company full of young people, not old fossils like me. But yeah, I think that the principle that's been most relevant to me, I think, is just continuous improvement and curiosity, making sure that you're never happy just accepting things for what they are or how they are, but always trying to make things better and asking good questions.
Great, great, awesome. Final question: would you say adding a master's degree in business administration is a great investment to a product management career?
There's a lot of debate about this. I mean, I don't have an MBA, so it's difficult for me to be 100% like objective about this. I don't think that it's necessary at all. I think that it's perfectly possible to be a fantastic, amazing product manager, entrepreneur, business leader without any MBA at all. However, I do think that you, we talked about it earlier, business sense. I think it's important that you get business sense from somewhere. Now, obviously, an MBA will give you good understanding of lots of different aspects of business. So I don't want to diminish it at all. And it also, as far as I understand, gives you an amazing network of people. So, like, people go to Harvard, for example, they go and get an MBA. They know loads of the most powerful people in the world from like 15 years later, or something like that. And I know loads of people that have MBAs that say that the network part of it is the best part. Just the fact that you've basically been to college with a bunch of really clever, motivated people that have all learned loads of really interesting stuff and got great networks. I think that's a big part of it. I don't imagine it would be a problem. I don't think it would hold you back from being a product manager. I think it's definitely an investment in your business skills, but I don't necessarily think it'd be a great investment as such because it costs a lot of money. It would probably be an okay investment, but I think you can also get the same skills from other places. And especially if you've been around for as long as I have, then you learn a lot of these things just through the kind of cut and thrust of work as well, which I think is also another important thing. Like the longer you work in companies, the more you know, just by the fact that you work in companies. But obviously, if you want a shortcut, then some kind of course is probably a great way to get started.
Wow. Thank you so much, Jason. This has been a very, very, very wonderful chat.
Yeah,
You
always a
guys,
pleasure.
yeah, I'm sure everyone is excited. I mean, let's thank Jason. Jason has really, really given us quite a. I have learned a lot as well. It's sometimes it's really annoying when you're the host because you can't jot things down. But now I have to go back and watch this over again and watch the recording. Thank you so much, Jason, for dedicating your time to educate us,
Yeah, no worries.
to share some knowledge with us. You can follow
Absolutely.
Jason on Twitter, one Jason Knight, and also catch up with him on LinkedIn, Jason Knight. I'm
Hmm.
sure that if you have further questions, Jason will be very, very open to um, answering all of those questions as
Oh,
well.
absolutely. Yeah, I love to chat. I love to help. Just always happy to connect with people, and yeah, hope that this was somewhat helpful to some of you.
Great, awesome. Thank you so much, Jason. And thank you everyone for attending the call. Yes, the recording will be shared with everyone, so you don't have to worry if you miss most of it. And yeah, Jason, thank you so much. Have a great evening.
Have a
And
great evening, everyone. Lovely to meet you all.
bye.